everyone. Welcome to Sentinel. I wasn't going to do a podcast today, but given President Trump and Secretary Hex's decision to purge the Pentagon, I think it warrants a discussion. Many people are calling this a purge. I call it more of a Trump-Hexet reset, which is much needed, by the way, in the Department of Defense. But before we start, I just want to remind everybody to please share the channel with your loved ones, your ex-wife, your mother-in-law, and especially your neighbors. We need to grow the Sentinel team. So getting back to the topic at hand, is this the Trump-Hexet reset? I think it is. And, the writing was on the wall. They've been talking about it. They spoke about it all throughout the election cycle. And especially when they came into office, they talked about it. And it was bound to happen. 3 weeks back, they fired the Commandant of the Coast Guard. And everybody knew there was going to be other firings that were going to happen. And, so C.Q. Brown, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Lisa Franchetti, and the Air Force White Chief of Staff, General Slifey, were fired. And the interesting part is that they weren't allowed to retire. That begs the question, will they be allowed to retire at the 4-star rank, or will they revert back to a 2-star rank and then be allowed to retire? Remember, C.Q. Brown already had a target on his head. And the reason for that was because this video that he released a few years back when the Black Lives Matter movement came about, and the video was entitled, "Here's What I'm Thinking About."
Here's what I'm thinking about. I'm thinking about how full I am with emotion, not just for George Floyd, but the many African Americans that have suffered the same fate as George Floyd. Finally, I'm thinking about my historic nomination to be the first African American to serve as the Air Force Chief of Staff. I want the wisdom and knowledge to lead, participate in, and listen to necessary conversations on racism, diversity, and inclusion.
Now, when he released it, I found it kind of odd that a serving general, he was Chief of Staff at the time, would release a video like that sort of embroils himself into social issues. That was a huge mistake. And as a result of that, he got put on a pedestal for the DEI movement. Now, I'm not wholly against DEI. I believe that we need diversity, but we don't need diversity at the expense of standards and meritocracy. That's what the issue is. We need a military that can fight. We don't need a military that's become a social experiment. Nonetheless, so Trump is going to nominate General Dan Kane as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He retired as a lieutenant general. It's an odd choice because he has no service or combatant command level experience. A lot of people are calling this a purge. And the problem with purges is that they don't address the underlying cause. A purge is like a tumor. You cut out the tumor, but you don't address the cancer. And we have to treat the cancer. And the cancer is pretty deep when it comes to the military, because otherwise, if you don't fix the cancer, the next administration is going to come along and they're going to have their own purge. So this pendulum keeps swinging back and forth, and we start playing ping pong with the military. To have an adverse effect on our military by these 4-year cycles that keep going on. So we need to look at the underlying causes of why we are where we are today. Why is our military almost dysfunctional at the senior officer level, where these senior officers like C.Q. Brown get embroiled in social reform issues rather than focus on war fighting and making sure that the military is providing the best possible defense for the American taxpayer. That's what their purpose is. So let's talk about some of these issues. First one is to really understand why we're here today is you got to understand the Goldwater-Nichols Act of 1986. When I was going to the School of Advanced Warfighting, my thesis was on the Goldwater-Nichols Act. And, I went up to Congress. I interviewed several congressmen, got their opinions, and I wrote this document. And in that document, I mentioned that at some point we're going to have to update the Goldwater-Nichols Act. It really came about after Operation Eagle Claw, or Desert One, if you remember, in Iran, the fiasco that was there when we were trying to assemble this joint force, and it just turned into a catastrophe. So as a result, Goldwater-Nichols Act was implemented into law, which created a singular chain of command from the president down to the Secretary of Defense. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff was an advisor to the president. That position was really created in 1949. but that chain of command went to the combatant commanders. And as a result, the combatant commanders became very powerful, and the jointness or the joint staffs became very powerful. So we tried to create this joint force. And consequently, what happened is we mushroomed to like 900 some general officers. The size of these commands is unsustainable. So what I would first do is look at these commands and look at the combatant commanders themselves. Are they really the type of leaders that we want responsible for these regional commands? So that's the first thing. The second thing is, can we perhaps mothball some of these commands or put them in their reserve components? Let the reserves handle them. For example, Southcom. Do we really need an active duty command as Southcom, or can the reserve components handle that? So these are some of the hard decisions we really need to make. We certainly want a military that can defend the United States of America, but we also want a military that we can afford as the taxpayers. Now, you know how important it is to have this massive military to defend America. I'm not sure I buy into that horse shit. I'll tell you why. Who in their right mind would invade America? Think about this. Let's just look at the numbers. Americans own over 500 million weapons. Over 500 million. You think anybody in their right mind would even think about invading America? And I'll give you an example. The U.S. military has roughly about between 4.5 to 5 million weapons. So here what we're saying is 500 million weapons versus 4.5 million weapons. Nobody in the right mind is going to invade America. America's quite safe for the most part, right? It's we get in trouble when we go on these foreign misadventures. And we go on these foreign misadventures because of the military-industrial complex and some of our alliances with foreign countries. And we need to throttle back on that. America first. And one way to throttle back on that is by throttling back on the combatant commands that we have. Yes, they're necessary, but not at the level that they've bloated themselves up to be. They're like an obese person with gout. They're dysfunctional, frankly. And they've made a mess. I mean, just look at the Afghanistan withdrawal. So we've got these commands globally now that are responsible for over 750 bases worldwide. Now think about that. In my opinion, we've gotten too big to succeed because it's just turned into a giant bureaucracy, and we've forgotten what our main purpose is. Our main purpose is war fighting. But what's happened is the people that are getting promoted are what I call pencil pushers or pole smokers. You know, these people get on these staffs and they work their way up to staff. They've never commanded. They haven't spent any time in the field. And they've read a lot of books. And they're smart guys. And their heart's in the right place. But they just lack the experience to make these prudent operational decisions. And there's several of them. I don't want to single out any one person. But there's people that haven't commanded above the rank of colonel. And, you know, they command a regiment or a MEU or a brigade. And then after that, they haven't commanded a division, they haven't commanded a corps, and but they've stayed on the joint staff, being great staff officers, or being an assistant to a secretary or a military secretary to a chief of staff. These staff positions, they have visibility, and then they get promoted, and then they all of a sudden get made into a combatant commander without having that operational experience for a 1-star, 2-star, and 3-star. All of a sudden, as a combatant commander, he's responsible for this joint force that he has never really operationally commanded or knows how to command. But he certainly knows how to write about it. He knows how to, he's read a lot of books about the joint force. And trust me, I've said this before, reading is very important. And I've read all these books. I've read them. But by reading books, you can't become proficient. It's sort of like saying you can read a muscle magazine and don't have to go to the gym and put the work in. And you can, compete for Mr. America. It ain't going to happen. That's the bottom line. Because you don't have the calluses on your hands. You got to have these calluses. It comes from hard work. In my opinion, that the Goldwater-Nichols Act needs to be amended. It needs to be updated. And until we do that, what's going to happen is the next administration is going to come and they're going to fire, all the generals that Trump put in there and rehire the ones that they want. And part of this update of the Goldwater-Nichols Act, I recommend the following. Officer promotions need to be scrutinized. And what I mean by that is that we need proven warfighters, not proven staff officers, or as I call pole smokers. That's what we need. And as part of these officer promotions, How we set up these promotion boards need to be scrutinized, because typically what happens is the service chief, sends out, establishes these promotion boards and gives them the promotion precepts. And then that is basically the guidance of, what type of officer they're looking for, what ethnic background, blah, blah, blah. That shit needs to be stopped. It needs to be just proven on their operational experience. That's what they get promoted upon. That's what we need to do. And secondly, Congress, if you remember, Senator Tuberville from Alabama put a hold on all the nominations. And then they came back and they said, we'll individually do each nomination. But then the Senate started complaining it's going to take too long. Well, it should take a long time. And in my opinion, when you're nominating a 3 and a 4-star, Senate should take the time out to interview the person at the committee level or at the full Senate level, because these are important positions and powerful positions, and you want to make sure it's the right guy, rather than the Secretary of Defense or the President sending a list to the Senate and it gets rubber stamped and everybody gets promoted. That's why politics has sort of infiltrated its way into the military. So that's part of the promotion process, and the Senate needs to play its legislative role in promoting and confirming officers in the military at the 3-star and the 4-star rank. It's very important. I understand you can't interview every major, lieutenant colonel, Or the Senate gives their consent, you can certainly start interviewing the brigadier generals and the major generals and the lieutenant generals and the generals. I mean, that's the role of the Senate. It just can't be a rubber stamp process where the list comes up and promote them. The next thing is, if you truly want to change the culture, you got to start looking at the officer training and education. And I'll tell you this much: we've got some of the best facilities and some of the best training and education worldwide. I've had the luxury of traveling to other countries and seeing how they train their military compared to ours. We've got the best, hands down. There's no doubt about it. But the problem is this: we've gotten too good. And so typically at the War College, I attended the Naval War College. You've got a active duty 06 professor, and then you've got a PhD civilian professor. These two professors become the advisors to the seminar group, which is generally anywhere from a dozen to 18 students. But the problem is this: you've got these PhDs coming in there with no tangible experience. Most of them haven't been in the military, so they start bringing their own philosophies and all this stuff into the discussions. And what happens is, as a military student, you're sitting there and you start doing the head nod. Yes, sir, yes, sir, yes, sir, rather than having this dialogue and pushing back, because we're trained to obey, right? So it's very easy for us to just sit there and accept what a lot of these people are saying. So what I propose is get rid of these damn PhDs. They're good guys, don't get me wrong, but they don't belong in military institutions. We want retired officers in there that have the experience, that can talk to some of the issues that we're discussing in these military colleges. Well, I'd also love to see staff NCOs being brought in as professors, and also warrant officers, especially chief warrant officers with the experience that they have. Because that gives you a holistic approach to them. Oh, that's a big word I use, holistic, huh? That gives you a well-rounded approach to the military, and that's what we need. So we got to clean up our training and education, especially our war colleges, where a lot of these hairy-fairy ideas start seeping in. Push them out. The next thing I would say is, I mentioned we've got around 900 general officers, and we need to review every one of them. Every one of these 900 needs to be reviewed to make sure that they have the war-fighting ethos, and if they don't, they should be retired so the new blood could move up. And that's very important, because otherwise what's happened is these guys go dormant for 3-4 years, go into hibernation, and once the administration changes, they're going to pop back up and with their ideas, because they haven't forgotten the ideology that they're inculcated with. So it's very important to bring in new blood. And there's some good ones, don't get me wrong. I mean, vast majority are probably very good general officers, but they've just become part of this culture. And they've been shadow banned. The good ones have been shadow banned by the bad ones, because the bad ones are sent to these higher positions, and then they silence everybody or they shadow ban everybody. Next one I want to discuss is the Judge Advocate General Corps. Now, these are basically the lawyers in the military. Now, what I propose is that all the JAGs report directly to the Secretary of Defense, through the JAG Corps. They're assigned to individual commands, but they report directly to the Secretary of Defense. And I think that's very important, because we've seen numerous commanders in the past abusing the judicial system of the military. I talked about one, a few podcasts back, a Marine commandant cited by a court for illegal, unlawful command influence. So what's happened is a lot of these commanders have weaponized the judicial process and the JAGs, their staff judge advocates, and they come after you with vengeance. I'm telling you. I've experienced this myself. When they try to charge me with conduct unbecoming an officer because I used the F word and claimed that I had assaulted Marines when I'd never had, because first of all, I was never alone, and second of all, I'd never assaulted anybody. And if I had, I certainly would have been charged, but it was nothing. Well, what they did was they destroyed my career, and then to silence me, they preferred these charges on me. When it went up for a hearing, they looked at it and they said, "This is all horseshit," and they threw it out. And and I just walked away and retired, fed up and pissed off. Nonetheless, so the Judge Advocate General needs to be there to be an impartial body to not only protect the troops, but protect the system and the impartiality. Remember, the Uniform Code of Military Justice was created by Congress to stop the abuses. But what's happened over time is our senior leadership has taken over the UCMJ and weaponized it. This must stop. Once we move the JAG apparatus and the UCMJ directly out from under the commanders to the Secretary of Defense as an independent entity, you're going to see justice being served equitably. And there'll be one system of accountability. I think that's very, very important to have one system of accountability. We've talked about that many times. Things that the President and the Secretary are doing, I think, are fantastic and much needed. But we just can't cut the tumor out. We got to address the cancer. And some of the recommendations I've made will help to address the cancer. I mean, there's another podcast I can do on acquisition, how corrupt that whole process has become. Maybe we'll save that for another day. But the immediate action that's required to change the culture and address the cancer are the 5 items that I mentioned. But there's also a 6th item that needs to be addressed. And the 6th item is the Afghanistan withdrawal. We need to have accountability. And those that were responsible for the Afghanistan debacle, such as General Austin, General Milley, and General McKenzie, need to be recalled to active duty and held accountable. There should be no exceptions because victims and their families deserve justice. We can't forget the victims and their families. There were 13 Marines and sailors that were killed, over 40 wounded, over 200 Afghans were killed, several hundred wounded. And then on top of that, we had 10 innocent civilian Afghans, 7 of whom were children, were killed in an erroneous drone strike. And we got to get to the bottom of this. Who ordered the drone strike? What was the ROE? Where was the operational commander at? Was he sitting back in Tampa or in Qatar giving out orders? Or was he at the point of friction, failure, and transition, that being Kabul Airport? And then why the hell did we choose Kabul Airport and not Bagram? So these are all the hard questions we need to ask because, as I've said in the previous podcast, the lives of our sons and daughters matter. And when they're just thrown away because of stupidity and hubris, that's not right, and that's not who we are. Accountability and responsibility go hand in hand, and that's why we have general officers. And if they can't handle the two, then they don't need to be there. So I applaud the President. I applaud Secretary of Defense for the decisions they've made, and I hope they keep going. This is their chance to fix the military so we can succeed in the future challenges facing our nation. I think it's very important. And I'd also like to think about your thoughts. What are your recommendations to the President and the Secretary of Defense in changing DOD once and for all to make us a better organization? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. It's very important that we do this and we get it right because the challenges facing our nations are significant. And we got to get organized for success. That's all I got. Stay rugged, stay united. Khan out.